Hello, hello, hello. I am Christy Abel, certified sexual health educator, high school counselor, and proud mama. And today I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about autism and sexual health literacy. And this was actually the final project for my grad certificate in sexual health. So I'm quite proud to share it with you. Okay, so here's our agenda, so there's no mysteries. I'll start with a short territorial acknowledgement. We'll get into a very short, what is autism, very brief overview. Certain assumptions that have been made and continue to be made around autism and sexual health, what should be taught and how, some autism-specific challenges in regards to sexual health, including privacy, culture of compliance, hygiene, romance, and physical touch. And last but not least, I will touch on the intersections of autism and gender and or sexual diversity. Now, before I move forward, it's very important to, when speaking with an autistic person or a person with autism, to talk about how they like to be referred to, because I found that it is quite, it's quite vast. And so, however, most people that I have spoken with have said that they prefer to be called autistic because it is something part of who they are. So I will be using a person with autism or autistic interchangeably. Okay, so I recognize and appreciate that I'm an invited guest in the traditional territory of the Tsawwassen and Musqueam First Nations. I have the privilege to work, earn, play, and live here in this beautiful place. I express gratitude to the Coast Salish community and all Hmong speaking people, and offer my respect to all of the elders who have gone before us and First Nations people who are with us today. And I encourage you to do the same wherever in the world you may be watching this from. Haichka. Okay, so what is autism? So it is a neurodevelopmental disorder that is often characterized by deficits of social communication and presence of restricted interests and repetitive behaviors. Now, it used to be divided up into all these different sectors: Asperger's, autistic disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, and pervasive developmental disorder. But in the DSM-5, they were all combined into autism spectrum disorder. And then there were severity level descriptors were added to help categorize the level of support needed for the individual. And in terms of prevalence in Canada, and I do believe that this is quite on par with the rest of the world who studies these kinds of things, about 1 in every 66 kids. And so with the prevalence being a little higher in those born with a penis and testicle versus those born with vulva and vagina. All right, so it's pretty common. All right, this is from our friends at SIECUS, which is a nonprofit in the United States. They say that individuals with physical, cognitive, or emotional disabilities, that's interesting, have a right to education about sexuality, sexual health care, and opportunities for socializing and sexual expression. Okay, so here are some assumptions around sexuality and autism. People who are autistic tend to be put into one of two categories on these total extremes. One where it's assumed that they are asexual, that there's no sexuality, no interest in it, that they should be protected and childlike, and that they don't need the information because they'll never use it. And wrong for the most part. Or we go to this other side of the spectrum where there's this hypersexuality, where they're a danger to themselves and others, with uncontrollable sexual expression, with that others need to be protected from them, they need to be protected from themselves, that their sexual behavior is labeled as deviant, or that they just can't even handle or understand sexuality education. And also wrong. Most people are going to be between these extremes. So when we're looking at autistic youth, when I first designed these slides, with the help of my partner, Cheyenne, hi Cheyenne, we were looking at gearing our audience towards 13 to 18-year-olds. However, because of the lack of sex ed, not just in schools, but for people who are of diverse abilities, this could be for any age, right? Over, like, I'd say 13 and older. So what happens, how autistic youth are impacted is sometimes they are pulled from planned sex ed. They're given an exclusive focus on abduction or abuse prevention, which is very important, which we'll look at some stats in a few minutes. It's very reactive, as in they were not taught about safe masturbation routines and privacy. And so now it's happening. And so we're like, oh, we need to do something, right? I do see this a fair amount at the schools that I work at. Or they're only teaching self-care skills. They're often fear-based or shamed, like if you do this, this is going to happen, you'll be naughty, and when it does occur, it's significantly delayed. Now, here's the thing is, regardless of intellectual ability, an autistic youth's body clock is going to be the same as if they weren't autistic. Okay, so they really, really need the same kind of education. And as I said in so many of my videos, the sex ed is the one area of education where you really need it before you need it, because there is a too little too late situation here. Okay, and also this is was very interesting to me, and I'll spend the last few minutes talking about it, is that sex ed is often very heterosexual and cis normative, and for autistic youth it really, really shouldn't be. Okay, so what should be taught? Basically the same stuff, but it will need to be taught in a bit of a different way. So it recognizes that we all have different sexualities and values, that human development is important. We need to learn about gender and sexual orientation, about appropriate sexual behaviors and when and where, and with whom, sexual health, sexuality in the law, decision making, and relationships and dating. I've got a couple of clever little slip-ups in this one, so it's interesting. I might have to TM some of it. Decision making.
The conversations with young people about sexuality ideally should be happening before young people have got partners and are thinking about intercourse.
Okay, it's really important to talk to all teenagers, full stop, early as possible, in a way that they're going to understand about the changes that are going to happen to their body, who they might be attracted to, be it a crush on a school teacher or a bus driver, right through to being attracted to same-age peers. Children and young people have to be taught that this is normal and that they will be sexual beings.
Clearly, things need to be done in a slightly different way to what you would say a normally developing 14-year-old. Sometimes, doing things more in a one-on-one way, using materials for a child rather than a teenager might be more appropriate. Most of them get there in the end, but it needs to be an ongoing chat. Just assuming that they know stuff, like most other 14, 15-year-olds, can be a big, big mistake.
We need to be careful to acknowledge and recognise that not everyone's going to be heterosexual, and to make sure that the doors are open for all of those discussions and space for different approaches to life.
People need to know that sexual activity with themselves and the right person is completely okay. But they also need to know that there are right times and right places and the right people.
There's books in the library that may help, which explain in picture format what a man and a woman do, and also how babies are made and why they grow pubic hair and why women grow breasts and why we all have to go through that stage.
We did have issues very early on where he'd have his hands in his pants and want to do it all the time, and just to have, and it wasn't even that he was doing anything, just that, it just seemed to be good, that's just comfortable. And so, we went through that issue of, hands out of pants. His support helped because he knew he couldn't do it there. School helped because they have a no touching policy, and you've got to also, keep your private bits private. So that was easy. And we just sort of tended to say, you know, either in the bathroom or in your room is where you can have your hands in your pants, everywhere else, no. And he took that on board pretty well.
Sometimes when particularly younger children have got into a habit and doing this more frequently, or are doing it when they're bored or doing it when they're stressed, that there needs to be a reward for not doing it and alternative behaviour options being put in place. If you're stressed, can we think of something else that you could do instead when you're stressed? Because what you're doing is something that really would be better not done in public.
There are some very excellent resources around that are actual people that teach young women and young men how to do things in the privacy of their own home. They're not pornographic, they're instructional videos about how to masturbate and how to have sexual intercourse and how to go about it appropriately in a fashion that you're not going to harm yourself. You're not going to cause anyone else in your house trauma. You clean up after yourself, all that kind of stuff.
We also had some sign language introduced to him so that he knows where to stop or not now. I also found it very helpful to talk to him in a very low voice. So if we're in public, I would just say, yeah, people, and that works out for him.
From time to time, I think parents and educators have to be prepared to be a little bit surprised by what happens, and not if your child comes to you with a wicked problem around sex, don't freak out. You have to just say, okay, well, this is something we're going to have to deal with, and we deal with it openly and get as much support as we can to do this now, because this is something we can deal with now.
Parents tend to be worried about one of two things. Will he get a boyfriend or girlfriend, or he's just so interested but doesn't understand the boundaries.
He has shown a little bit of an interest in one of the girls, only just that he says hi to her more than he says to the others. And, you know, it's only like, it's very innocent. It's like, really, it reminds me of like when your kids are just starting school and in kindergarten and they have that first little crush. And, you know, I know he's 14, but that's what it's like. It's that real innocent sort of, oh, I like her sort of thing.
A lot of young men that I've worked with, they have an idea about girlfriends, and that idea is that they'd like to get one. They'd like to get a girlfriend. And I sort of say, well, how are we going to go about this getting a girlfriend? They don't exactly come on the supermarket shelf, you know. It's really complex to, you know, ask a girl on a date or even just be friendly with a girl and say the right things that might impress her or get her interested in you or whatever.
We're trying to get that message that actually it's all about friendships and connection, because you're not doing that so well yet, before we can get into sort of higher forms of connection, like having a girlfriend or a boyfriend.
The issue they'll have is the complicated interactions between the two people and the mixed messages about, you know, what other people are thinking or feeling or what their intentions are. So that's hard enough as it is for normal people, so to speak. But I can see that being a real challenge for him.
Relationships and personal boundaries is an interesting one. And it is something that definitely has to be taught. And that's something that we're definitely dealing with in puberty with her.
I would suggest getting some books from the library on love and relationships and explaining what the differences are in acquaintances, friendships, family relationships, like cousins, uncles, aunties, etc. And it's okay to give them a hug or a handshake. Teach them how to have a handshake.
I'd be a bit careful about making sure that you left your options open, because not everyone's heterosexual in their inclination. So I'd be cautious about saying partner and that you may become interested in other people.
Great. I am so grateful to the Australian Parenting Network. This is, I went through a ton of videos to try to find the one that I would like to show you. And this one was, it just kept ticking all the boxes. So we'll just expand on a lot of this. Whoops, we will when I can move on. Okay, so here are some autism specific challenges. Okay, one of them is social reciprocity, right? So we're used to, if you do something nice for me, I don't owe you, but you know, it makes me more inclined to do something nice for you. And that can be a challenge for people with autism. Okay, so social communication, so the eye contact piece. And it's, again, this is not a blanket statement for all autistic people. These are just some very common challenges that we see with people with autism. And inflexibility around, it's kind of like there's a lot of black and white thinking around things like sexuality, dating, friendships, really about anything. And then there's deficits in social cognition. So we all have these different types of intelligences, right? We have our IQ, we have our EQ, which is our emotional quotient. There's our social cognition, right? How comfortable we feel socially. And there is very often a deficit there. Now, when children with autism are diagnosed early, and this is true of any type of mental health, actually, concern, is that their early intervention is just super, super key. My 12-year-old's best friend is autistic, as are many people in her family. And things have changed considerably for everybody based on the interventions that happened at school and privately and with their parent, all of that. Also deficits sometimes in communication and interaction skills, not knowing what to say, not picking up on those social cues. And very often people with autism don't have a ton of experience speaking with other people, whether that's their choice or not. And so these can all make it difficult to have a romantic relationship that can lead to a strong, healthy sexual relationship. All right, and privacy. So this was mentioned in the video. Super, super important to define what is private and what is public. And if nothing is deemed private, then basically all behaviors are public. So we must teach the difference. So the difference that, like, we can say the bathroom in your bedroom, but what happens when they're in a bathroom at a restaurant? That is, by that definition, that is private. No, no, no. It's the bathroom in your own home with the shades drawn, you know, with and the lock on, I would suppose. And also in the bedroom, okay, with the blinds drawn and the doors closed. And then everywhere else is public, including like the living room and the kitchen in your home. These are kind of semi-private spaces, but it needs to be very explicitly stated that privacy is only in your own bedroom and in the bathroom with the door closed and blinds drawn. Okay, and but all young people have to learn to scan and be aware of their surroundings. We all need to do this about when, you know, kids learn pretty early that, you know, if you fart at school, people remember, you know, and so scanning around going, oh, it's not the time right now. Well, I need to go to the bathroom. But most importantly, with teenagers of all kinds, like it doesn't matter what kind of who your teenager is, okay, we have to allow them to have privacy. It's part of their growing up process. And so we need to allow for it, regardless of the struggles or that your teenager might have. Okay, so we need to teach alternate behaviors. Okay, so if there's an appropriate time, place, or way to engage in the behavior, we want to teach it, right? So masturbation is a healthy thing. Doing it 24/7 is not. A person would hurt themselves, right? So they need to be taught safe, effective, and appropriate masturbation routines. What do you do if you get an erection in public? If a person has itchy genitals, where can they scratch them in public, right? And who is it safe to ask questions about bodies? We will definitely address safety in a few minutes, right? But while we're teaching these, we always want to protect people's dignity, and they also need instruction and skill building around that social reciprocity, about sensory issues and consent, so that they can develop healthy relationships. Everybody deserves the right to this. Okay, so people with autism tend, because of this black and white thinking that I mentioned, tend to be kind of streamlined about when they should be saying yes or no. And now we need to teach consent in all sexual health programs, and it's a major focus of this channel. But we want to practice saying no, right? So we need to find different ways and appropriate and interactive ways to say no. And we need to teach the differences between safe and unsafe touch. Again, this is a blanket for all sexual health. Okay, I do believe this is very, very important, and this is something you can start teaching, pre-kindergarten. We never want to force our kids to give hugs, to give kisses, to say I love you. Okay, kids need to be taught about boundaries for their own bodies, and one of the things that you can do with any child to reduce their chances of being targeted by a sexual predator is to teach the word no with like force and determination. So we do need to address this compliance of consent. I have had autistic people, particularly women, who have told me that they didn't know that they could say no, and they were adult women at the time. They just thought that this is what they were supposed to do. Okay, so it's really, really important that we address this and give people permission to say no to the things that don't feel right to them, that don't make them feel like, if it's not a solid like, woohoo, yes, it is a no. Okay, moving on to hygiene. People with ASD can sometimes have troubles with the hygiene routine. They can be either hypo or hypersensitive to different smells, touches, textures. Sometimes it's the feeling of water on the body, sometimes temperature regulation, the texture of soap, sometimes under nails, film on teeth, all of these kinds of things, whether it's them or the other person might have difficulty with this. When it comes to sexual health, sometimes condom usage is like a sensory intolerability. And typically it seems to be that lubricated condoms are the problem. Now we want to encourage condom use for everybody, okay, until you are in a person isn't in like an ongoing, definitely monogamous, everybody's been tested, that kind of thing. For more information about STIs and prevention, I will link my STI literacy presentation below in the notes. Okay, but non-lubricated condoms seem to be okay with the use of lube on the outside of the condom to make it more comfortable for both partners. Okay, in terms of romance, okay, so I love this thing on your right, my left, I can't remember, okay, of categorizing where's my relationship with the different people, right? So we have our, family, which should be pretty straightforward, but then we would want to say, like, are you a 1, close friends with this person? Okay, just friends, we're just friends. Are you 2, do you have an attraction or interest to this person? 3, are we going on dates and trying to see if we like each other more? 4, we have decided that we really like each other more and we are seriously romantically dating. And then 5, we're in a committed and intimate relationship. So these kind of charts can be very, very helpful, because individuals with ASD very often want to be social and romantic. They do not want to be lonely. They want to have a partner or partners. Now, there can be prominent social barriers, i.e., they've either socially isolated themselves or been isolated by other people, or they feel stigma around not quite maybe getting the social cues as fast or as easily as other people. And sometimes that prevents this level of engagement. And people with autism are typically frustrated by their lack of knowledge of skill and how to develop and manage a romantic relationship. So like was suggested in the video, getting books out and watching about romance and how do we build relationships and how do we do it safely and how do we do it while respecting our partner's boundaries and all that kind of stuff. These things can be very, very helpful, because we will develop typically this list, right? There's an attraction, and then maybe there's dating, and then maybe it turns into something more serious, and learning the skills and clues that can lead to that kind of relationship. Okay, so we need to make the implicit explicit. So because of this lack of the ability to interpret social cues, we need to be like, oh, here's how you initiate a friendship, right? So my kid, my 8-year-old is in the pool yesterday, and this other kid, and he's kind of shy. Okay. He doesn't typically make the first move, but this other kid got in the pool and was like, do you want to play together? And he was like, yes. And then they spent the next hour together, and then they've made a new friend. But my younger son, due to his just initial shyness, once you're in, right? But like, anyways, so he's not that confident in initiating friendships, but he will receive it really well. Okay. So anyways, how do we tell when someone is flirting with us? How do we establish boundaries within relationships so that you're not being taken advantage of? And again, this doesn't matter what gender a person identifies as. And also, how do you discuss sexual consent and what you're into and what pleases you and what makes you feel good, and and then what doesn't, and what are you not ready to do, right? All these things are important. So they need to make these implicit, explicit. And again, I would say when it comes to consent, it has to be explicit. Otherwise, you don't got it. Okay, now in terms of risks of sexual engagement for people with ASD are 7 times more likely to experience sexual assault, often prone to manipulation, as I have found out through the interviews that I've done. People are often very unaware of safe versus unsafe touch, because they might not see it like that. They might say, oh, I'm supposed to do what adults tell me, right? And not in this way. Typically, sometimes too, no, not typically, but sometimes, but typically those born and who identify as male, there can be this risk of hypersexuality, but again, it's at one very end of the spectrum, and often education is needed. That's the main thing. And sometimes there can be excessive masturbation, which, if done too frequently, can lead to injury. Okay, now interpersonal touch has been shown for all people to be play an important role in governing emotional well-being. Okay, we need physical touch. People like different, varying degrees of it, right? But it is universal, and it can be used in lots of different ways. We share our feelings through touch. We can enhance the meaning of verbal and nonverbal communication. It can also have grounding effects, like if you're kind of maybe feeling frantic, and then someone lays a calming hand on your shoulder or gives you a hug that you welcome. It can be like automatically your nervous system settles down, and these kinds of things. But whether it's a strong handshake, it's like a pat on the back, a sensual caress, a nudge for attention, a tender kiss, a gentle brush of the shoulder. Okay, our physical touch can be more impactful than our words. It really, really, really can, and especially in terms of the energy that we have behind whatever we're doing. Now, because some individuals with ASD have increased sensitivity to physical sensations, sometimes sensory issues can be an issue, especially if our partner is very much wanting that physical touch. So there has to be discussion around how everybody can be happy in this way, right? And fulfilled. Okay, so in this way, sexuality education for people with ASD and their partners should foster an awareness of individual sensory needs, educate about how they might be different from their partner, and then provide strategies how to communicate and manage those sensory differences. Same thing. Okay, so like my partner he wants physical touch way more than me, way more, right? I enjoy it. But like he is a hugger and a cuddler and all those kinds of things. And so I have to, I don't have to be the recipient of that all the time. So I tell him when I've had too much. But somebody with ASD might not know that they're allowed to say that. Okay. All right, we're going to wrap up here with the intersections of autism and gender and/or sexual diversity. And again, this has also been, I work with autistic people at work. I have autistic friends. And so I asked them if this resonated with them, and they were like, oh, yes, very much so. So this was exciting to me. And I feel like our LGBTQ2S+ community needs to become increasingly aware and open and supportive, because there's a lot of people with autism who don't identify as cis hetero. Okay, so there's becoming a significant, so the reporting research. So this is a burgeoning area of research, but I do think it's an exciting one. There's a significant overlap between being on the autism spectrum and being gender and or sexually diverse. Okay, so research is estimating between 6 and 27%. So let's even say it's 25. Okay, that is 25% of people who are autistic also think, also identify as gender diverse. And then gender dysphoria, okay, which is it's you're not feeling comfortable in your body. I'll really oversimplify it. I will have SOGI, which is sexual orientation and gender diversity, video later where I will dive deeper into that. But we're looking at 55 to 20%. But this one, okay, 55 to 70% of autistic individuals also identify within the LGBTQ2S+ community. I mean, that is an enormous amount of people. So now, Barron and Cohen in 2015 found that autism and sexual identity may actually share a biological pathway, perhaps one involving sex hormones in the earlier development. Now, when I showed this to a teenager that I work with, she was like, well, and I can't use her language. Well, I won't use her language because, well, it was the F word, right? But she was like, I was like, so what do you think? She goes, I think that people with autism just don't give up. I was like, she goes, we don't need to hide it because we just don't care. And I was like, oh, I was like, so maybe that's part of it, right? It's like, there's not like a fear of coming out per se for most, right? Just be like, oh, yes. And then another friend of mine who is autistic, and so is her daughter, started talking about being bisexual when she was like in grade 4, grade 5. And her mom had to say like, well, most people aren't, figuring this out quite yet. Some, of course, but like she was like, so we're just not going to talk about this maybe till like grade 6 or grade 7. And it was like, okay. And just needed to know that boundary. So there is this higher incidence, right, of LGBTQ autistic people. But it's possible that the qualities of this forthrightness and not like hiding behind masks and social convention allows some people with autism to acknowledge feelings beyond the cis and heterosexual categories. So social skills programs now obviously need to include the LGBTQ2S+ community. So any type of sexual health education for people with autism is got to include this. We cannot, just like it was also stated in the video, we cannot just make that assumption because it will not be meaningful. Okay, so we need to challenge stereotypes of what it means to be visibly LGBTQ2S+. It is important for students with ASD, all people with ASD who could identify as non-hetero and non-cis and won't conform to the normative ideas of LGBTQS heterosexual or cisgender individuals. So this then would make a person a double minority, but one that definitely, I believe, needs to be recognized. I feel that the LGBTQ2S+ groups and communities need to be more intentionally inclusive for neurodiverse people and promote autism awareness. This actually seems like just a really, really wonderful opportunity for inclusivity. All right, so here are a few resources that have all been vetted by my people in the autism community. The one that is the most exciting for the young people that I have worked with is the Hickey app, which is a dating app for people with autism in Canada. I believe it's Canadian, but yeah, I'm pretty sure. Anyways, and the 16-year-old that I worked with, I was like, you have to wait till you're 18. And she was like, I will, don't worry. She's like, but I'm pumped. She's like, I'm excited to meet other people that think like me. And with that, we will wrap up. I hope that this has been meaningful and you've garnered something from it in terms of autism and sexual health literacy. As always, I will put all of the resources, of which there are many, in the description, as well as links to any other videos that might interest you. All right. Bye.